Welcome to my humble little office. My name is R. Keith Andrews. I'm a spiritual guide and paranormal adept. The journey continues today on December, good question, 13th, 2025 at approximately 8 p.m. PST. Now, I've made it my life's calling to remind people that working together, we can make this a better world for virtually everybody. I build myself as a spiritual guide because the tools I offer are the exact same tools I personally use in my day-to-day life. And the philosophies of life I talk about are the same philosophies I personally use to guide virtually every decision I make. With this in mind, I know these tools will work for you because they continue to work for me and have literally worked for thousands of other people over the years with varying degrees of success depending on their own personal efforts. Now, before I get into things, I do want to tip my hat to Storm. He is our primary moderator. He usually hides in the back to make sure tech runs properly and to make sure that if we have any problem children showing up on the site, that they get removed before they become problems. And rest assured, he's very good at it. Now, we're going to be discussing Mobius, the Mobians Homeworld, where it is, how it came to be, and what you can expect if you ever manage to get there. Good luck with that part. But right off the bat, we have Mike Jones is in with the gold. How you doing, Mike? Glad you could join us. And again, people, remember, if you've got a question, doesn't matter how odd it may seem, okay, I will do my best to answer the question. If there's no question, I'll answer it honestly. I just won't guarantee you'll like the answer. Now we have Operation Shutdown. You are in with the silver. How's it going there, Operation? And yes, the journey continues. It has been a roller coaster to say the least this year. And then coming in with the bronze, we have Renee Andrews. How you doing, Renee? Glad you could join us. The reality is I've had to do a lot of revamping and a lot of organizing to make sure next year runs properly. And I'll tell you, it's been an uphill battle. But when we look at Mobius, the Mobians Homeworld, now let's start with its location. Okay, Mobius is in the exact same orbit as Earth is. Okay, but it's at 180 degrees on the other side of the sun. And bearing in mind it's at the same speed, okay, you will never be able to see it from Earth. Mankind sooner or later will get satellites out far enough to be able to see it. Operation is asking, Keith, have you been to the Mobians Homeworld? The short answer is yes. Okay, there's a lot more answers to that, but yeah, I've literally been on that planet. And it is, when we take a look at gravity, daylight, the whole 9 yards, it is virtually identical, although the continental layout is a little different. Size, pretty much the same. Okay, but then you got to remember, it was put in when it was built, and yes, Earth itself was built as well. When Mobius was built, it was built to act as a counterbalance to Earth. This is one of the reasons why Earth holds a stable pattern. Okay, now when you take a look at it, you are looking at a planet. It's got one major continent. Okay, and in all fairness, in the major continent, from my outlook, looks kind of like a cashew. Okay, but it covers almost half the globe. Yes, Mike, it kind of stunned me when I found out that Mike is asking, are you sure it's in the same solar system? Yeah, here's the neat part about that one. A couple of decades back, I went looking for information. And because I cannot tell you how to go anywhere on the internet, I basically was pushing buttons till I hit what I was looking for. And I found a link to Mobius literally on an offshoot of NASA's site. So NASA knows this planet exists. Okay, now I don't know if you guys believe in astrology or not. Kind of hard not to. You don't have to follow it, but it does exist. But Mobius itself, a site linked to NASA site, don't ask me which site, we're talking 20 years ago, I have trouble with 20 minutes ago. But it is in this solar system. Okay, we are not a solar system with only 8 or 9 planets. More to the point, they were built by the same person, but yes. Okay, there are a couple of fundamental differences there. Operation Mobius, when Earth was built, okay, it was started, and then when they decided they were building it, in order to counterbalance it, because everything else had gone sour, they put a counterbalance in the way of Mobius. Okay, now Mobius was left to grow of its own accord. And if you take the scientist's word for it, on Earth, Earth is growing, I think, by about a millimeter a year. I think. Okay, I really forget the amount, but Earth was tended to. Mobius was left to grow of its own accord. Okay, so like I've mentioned before, Earth itself is a Caboran, but Mobius is not. So of course, when it got put in as a chunk of rock. Okay, very similar. The reality is, like Mike is asking, do they have the same animal species or different ones? They started off with very similar, but because of a couple of major factors. One, there was no civilization that evolved alongside it. Okay, there was no sentient life on it until about 50,000 years ago. So the animals that are there and the plants that are there grew up without the other influences and without added pollutions. Plus, of course, oxygen levels stayed the same. So you're looking at a lot bigger plants and animals. Still very similar in configuration, but no less dangerous. And of course, when you think about it, if we look back in Earth's history, when the oxygen levels were higher, the animals were a lot bigger. But yeah, you are looking at very similar weather patterns, very similar animals. And the one thing that you'll find is humidity is a little higher in Mobius than it is on Earth. Okay, but that's because the oxygen levels are higher, and therefore plant life holds a little better. Now, the nice part about it is on Mobius, by the way, the gravity is pretty much identical. So you don't have an adjustment problem. You may, if you ever get over there, be a little lightheaded because their oxygen saturation level is a lot higher. Now, when you look at it, okay, Mobius evolved of its own accord with no guidance. It was just left alone. The animals and the plants evolved there. And whether you ascribe to creationism or evolution, that's your call. Okay, but I will tell you, when you look at the animals over there, they took on their own outlook. They didn't until 50,000 years ago. There was no civilization there. It was literally just a wild planet. Okay, some of the animals went back to the ocean. Some didn't. Okay, because from what I gather from Earth's history, you take whales for instance. Whales started out on land and then moved back into the water. Well, here's the neat little kicker. On Mobius, you'll actually find some whales are actually land-based. Okay, there are many animals that are very different there. The one thing that you don't have to worry about, okay, and it's really kind of weird, but there aren't a lot of actual predators there. More of what would have become predators became, more to the point, scavengers, okay, or carrion consumers, meaning they wait for the other animals to die of natural causes. Okay, natural causes or accident, depending on what it is. Now, there are some species that, like on Earth, some of the species there will lay their eggs in a living organism, and when the eggs hatch, this will kill the organism. But this also ends up producing a food source for the newborn. Now, Mobius itself, it's basically the same size as Earth. Now, I've already mentioned it's got one main continent. Okay, on the other side of the other side of the planet, well, realistically, it's pretty much on the same side, but it's also got an archipelago. Okay, which really boils down to underwater mountains and valleys. Okay, and that opens a whole new array of animals. Okay, that mankind doesn't see. But the thing you got to remember, that you got to realize with the Mobians, now we got to go back 50,000 years. On Earth, we had an empire here called the Lemurian Empire. Okay, but the Lemurian Empire reached almost 10 billion people. Okay, if I recall the numbers correctly, they were just over 8 when they decided they were going to colonize Mobius. Now you got to remember, they already knew about Mobius. So when they went there, they went with the intention of dropping anchor. But they went because they had no greed, no jealousy, and no famine. Okay, when they went to Mobius, this is the kind of civilization they took with them. So instead of just going in and going, oh, let's run a road through the middle of this orchard or through the middle of this forest, the Mobians went, okay, let's see how these things interact and figure out how to communicate. Now, here's the kicker. This is another similarity that people don't realize about Earth. All I've mentioned to you before, all things on Earth are connected. They're all intertwined. Okay, and what I mean by that is the trees talk to each other, the plants talk, all the plants do, the animals do. On Mobius, it's a little bit more direct. Okay, and the last thing you really want to deal with on Mobius is you don't want to have to deal with trying to terminate and trying to do a species wipeout, because the whole planet will strike back. Now, Earth is not quite that cohesive, but on Mobius, the Mobians still have the ability of physical manifestation. Okay, meaning they can think about it, and other than thinking about it, they don't have to do much. It shows up. Mike is asking, is it used by Earth visitors as a staging or refueling base to study life on Earth? No, in all fairness, the refueling base that you're referring to is actually on the other side of the moon. And yeah, I know what that sounds like. But that's where the staging is. And this is why, if you look at Earth moon, okay, if you watch Earth moon, watch the halo around it, you can actually see activity on the moon quite regularly. And for those of you that are of the opinion that all of that is CGI, understand when people started seeing activity on the moon, computers didn't even exist. Unless you count the ones in people's brains. But no, Mobius is a planet unto itself. And the thing is, because of the Mobians the way they are, they take care of the animals and the plants, and visitors are really cautiously watched because most people cannot handle the fact there is no secrecy on Mobius. You know, it is a completely mentally linked planet where the entire population is literally mentally linked to everybody else. And most of the off-worlders, humans included in this case, cannot deal with their mind being that open. But you got to remember, because there is no fear, because there is no jealousy, you don't have to worry about that neat little thing of, oh, maybe I'm thinking something that's going to upset somebody. They're very open from that end. It's the people that go there that have troubles. You know, so when we look at Mobius, you're looking at a planet, it has a static rotation. Okay, static as in it travels the same path that Earth does. Okay, with the sole exception that, and this is where it gets a little different because Earth is tilted to a degree. And I believe it's got an 8-degree spin, an 8-degree tilt off its vertical axis. Mobius does not. Mobius is sitting top to bottom. It is sitting on a vertical axis. Net result, it does have different weather patterns, and seasons tend to be static. Net result, you also have a much finer dividing line where the animals are concerned. And before you start worrying about it, no, Mobians are not interested in coming back and reclaiming Earth. They gave it up because they knew that that Earth was going down a sour path, and they didn't want to stick around. There was a chunk of them that said, we're just colonizing another place and carrying on. Well, net result, 10,000 years after the Mobians colonized Mobius, just Poland, the Lemurian Empire collapsed. Okay, and it collapsed in a big way, but it was done by accident. It wasn't a war, it was a miscalculation, or in this case, a no calculation. So the Mobians are quite happy where they are. They deal with the animals, and yes, on Mobius, what passes for lions and giraffes, you will see walking side by side, because what would have become lions ended up becoming carrion eaters. They don't hunt. They don't have to. You'll also find that one of the other big differences is the animals there don't really have a defensive background. They did not develop that kind of demeanor. You know, for instance, it's very weird when you take a look at some of them. But picture what happens. Picture what a Terran turtle would look like if you take the shell away. Because the shell was grown as a method of defense. They didn't need one. Okay, so a lot of what you're looking at there is a very symbiotic planet, where the Mobians and the animals literally get together, get along, and where we have graveyards, they have food bins. I.e., if a Mobian dies, they take it out to what you might call a graveyard, and they lay the body down. They remove all the clothing, all the valuables, and they lay it out in the open field. Okay, and this is where the carrion eaters come in and get their fill. Okay, it's one of many places, but that keeps the Mobians that are passing away, keeps them taken care of and, if you will, recycled in a natural fashion. And yeah, I realize when I'm talking about this, I'm sitting here going, this would be so hard for most humans to deal with because we put such a big fear around what happens when we die. Mobians don't have that fear. They literally have developed their sciences to understand what goes on. And of course, the fact they are totally mentally capable, they can literally feel the body collapse. This is not something they usually take time out to do, by the way. The other neat part about it is on Mobius, they don't have doctors. What they have is teachers. And the teachers teach the kids how to self-heal. There is no question about, oh, you have to be a doctor or you have to be a priest. In order to self-heal, the Mobians believe wholeheartedly, all you have to be is breathing. Because if you're not breathing, you're going to have a hard time doing anything. Okay. Now, yes, the Mobian ships are physical. Okay. They made the mistake early on of making them of simple mental cohesion. And that worked great until they ran into a couple of hiccups. Where the primary manifester passed away and all of a sudden the vehicle was gone. So they did develop actual technology. Okay. But it's kind of a mixture. And when you look at their homeworld, you're looking at a forest where you can the trees are literally big enough to build a house on if you really wanted to. Okay, we are not talking about small plants. And by the way, with that in mind, you also got to remember there are plants that you may call carnivorous. What it is a reactionary. So when you take a look at what would amount to an oversized sundew plant, okay, when you've got an animal that's died and you've got a sundew plant close by, you can pick that animal up and toss it onto the sundew, and the sundew will absorb it. Okay, now I'm using the same names that Terrans use. Okay, and some of these you may not know, but at least you got a reference point. So the so-called carnivorous plants, again, they deal with carrion. Okay, the other thing that is also really neat there is a lot of the animals have to be taught how to survive because there's so much danger on Earth. Many animals are born capable of already taking care of themselves. On Mobius, very few are fully functional, except the lower life forms. Okay, the bigger ones have to be taught. And it can be a real challenge, especially with your quadrupeds. Okay, because you got to help them get their footing. It takes a little bit, but you're not trying to get to cover. You're not trying to avoid mass extinction. Unless a volcano goes off, at which point you could be in trouble. Now, the other thing with the Mobian homeworld, okay, is they don't bother. They come over here periodically just to see what's going on from a research standpoint. Okay, and yes, I did years ago, like in this case, 40 years ago, roughly. I was downtown Kelowna, and I saw, and then one of the Mobian ships showed up here. And I mean, it was phenomenal. It was a great thing to see in my eyes. But the Mobian homeworld is a standard gravity compared to Earth. Okay, you don't get in the extreme weather because it doesn't have a tilt to the axis. Okay, so what you're looking at is pretty mild weather, unless you go right to the poles, at which point it's pretty bitter. But that's because it's at the poles. Okay. And yes, they do have mountain ranges, that sort of thing. Okay. The planet did not grow. It's not a smooth billiard ball type thing. We are talking about a planet that has a lot of shape to it and a lot of depth. But civilization there has evolved in 3 levels. 4, 5, I guess, because you got cities that are in the air, on the ground, on the surface of the water, under the water, on the sea, on the ocean floor, and underground. And it just depends on which people wanted to grow and wanted to live where. Okay, but yes, Mobians, when they colonized the planet, they decided they were going to colonize it equally so as not to put too much strain on any ecosystem. Okay, now there is intercity communication. And one of the neat things about it is, unlike on Earth, when you go into a Terran city, you're not going to see a lion walking around downtown. You're not going to see a rhinoceros traipsing through the library. On Mobius, this is a normal occurrence. Because again, even amongst the animals, because there are no predators to speak of, okay, what you end up with is a very relaxed world. Okay, you want to go to a relaxing spa, that'd be the place to go. They don't have conflict, even amongst the animals. Like I said, what would have become carnivores became your carrion eaters. They became the cleanup crew. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, if you can even fathom that. I know for me it was a wonderful discovery. And yeah, it is, like I said, it is in the same orbit as Earth in this solar system. Okay, and that's the one that so many people have a hard time believing. But just to expand on that a little, when you take a look at Earth, okay, on top of the 8 or 9, if you count Pluto as a planet, and I still count Pluto as a planet. Okay, if you count Pluto, you've got 9 planets, is what we're told. Except there is a planet inside the sun's photosphere. And again, NASA knows about it. Okay, I know this because I got the ephemeris off a site tied to theirs, the ephemeris for Vulcan. They also have another neat we also have, like I said, we've got Mobius over there, but there is a planet in between Mars and Jupiter by the name of Croinia. Okay, now the Mobians know about this. Okay, they have to study it at a different point, but because of the way that the orbit is, and do not ask me to try to sort out how the orbits work. That becomes somebody else's department. Okay, I can tell you these other planets are there inside our system. This is why the off-worlders refer to Earth as Sol 4, not Sol 3. Okay, but over in Mobius, they are taught about all of the planets in the solar system, and and I mean all of them. Okay, so they are taught that, and that is part of their education. The thing with the planet is that it has, because it's got such a higher level of oxygen, okay, decomposition can happen pretty quick. But this is why you got so many carrion eaters. Okay, one of the other things that you'll find is that they don't produce as many children simply because they don't have to. When you take a look at the insects over there, yes, you've got small insects because the small insects, the little guys, are the ones that break down the things into much smaller parts. It's literally all symbiotic. Okay, so between the insects and the plants, the organic material is broken down rather nicely. But what you got to remember is if you're going out into the woods, you got to remember all of the number of plants that are literally, instead of being poisonous or carnivorous, they literally are carrion eaters. And unfortunately, they can't tell if you're dead or not. So if you fall into something, for instance, a Mobian-sized pitcher plant, you fall into it, the acid in that thing will dissolve you very quickly. Okay, it's not a carnivorous thing, it's full of acid. Not a good way to go, by the way. They also, the other thing they don't have, on Mobius, they've got a one world government, but this is because they are a unified mind. They all have their own thoughts. They are not a hive mind. Okay, but they don't have wars at all because there is no war, there is no fear, there is no greed, and there is no jealousy. There's also, by the way, only one functional religion. Okay, there aren't several, and they don't have multiple different takes on it. So what you're dealing with is a lot of interaction. Even the animals, though they are not revered per se, okay, there is a very big difference between your animals and the Mobians. Now, the fact of the matter is they've got a science division that handles preparing the recently deceased food. Okay, they don't deal with this idea of let's go out hunting. You go out looking for the ones that have already died. Okay, and yeah, they have constant patrols looking for animals that have recently died. And the reason for that is because you've got to be there when it happens, because if you're not, something else is likely to get it. But there's an unwritten rule on Mobius. A lot of unwritten rules on Mobius. One of which is first come, first serve. And that simply means whether you're a Mobian or you're a carrion. Okay, the first one to touch said carcass is the one that gets claimed to the majority of it. Now, needless to say, the microbes and the microbes and the little insects and the little mammals, they will take their bits and pieces in spite of it. Okay, but what you don't have is massive fights over a body. The neat thing about it is that, and by the way, yes, Mobius does have a moon, but it was put there for the same reason that Earth's moon was put in place, and that was to provide an ebb and flow of tides. Okay, so that instead of having a tilted axis, they have a moon in place, and that moon provides the ebb and flow of the water. Okay, and for that matter, of the magma. Which I know. Why would you control the magma flow? Well, it's simple. And it's not controlled per se. It's a natural setup, as in it was built and then left that way. Now, because there is no war, there's been no abnormal decay on anything. Okay, net result, when you go to this place, you can see what it was like in its primordial days. Because the Mobians don't believe in cutting down forests in order to build a building. If they're going to build a building, if they're going to manifest a building, it'll be worked right into the landscape. Now, there are changes that are made. Clearly, you cannot put a physical body in the physical location of something else. So they have developed, they found when they were on Earth that they had gotten too used to the idea of just think about it and there it is. Okay. And of course, 10,000 years later, when the Lemurian Empire collapsed, the Mobians knew about it right away. They did not come rushing back. They stayed put. And because of the chaos, they severed connection. And that, mind you, they did say their goodbyes. And left the Lemurians that were here to interact with the humans that were evolving. And net result, the Mobians over on Mobius, now they do have a basic sort of art, well-developed one, really. But they went back, starting on Earth, they started to learn the intricacies of physical art. Taking ahead 50,000 years, they're pretty good at building. But they always do it looking realistically. If we make this change, what's going to happen to the local neighborhood? Hate that. When they're looking at setting up a new tower, they literally will look at that and go, okay, we've got plants growing here, so we're going to make room for them to grow. But they've got a neat technique where it comes to their building, that as the tree grows through the building, they simply reorganize the wall in order to accommodate the new growth. When I talk about feng shui on Earth, okay, works like a charm. They take it to a whole new level. And what you're looking at there is a world where if something is going to change, for instance, if they know where there's going to be a flash flood. Now, understand, flash floods are on Earth, they can be devastating, but they also have a purpose. And therefore, nature's normal course is revered by the Mobians. Okay, yes, people and animals and plants for that matter die when a flash flood happens. But again, that just becomes food for the carrion. It also provides fertilizer for the herbivores. You can see how there are so many differences on Earth compared to Mobius, that it would be hard for us to move over there and colonize because mankind doesn't get it. Okay, now, the First Nations, you go back centuries when they went to set up a settlement. My understanding is they used to look 7 generations down the road. That has since gone the way of the dodo bird. Okay, for the Mobians, it's just second nature. If we're going to put a building inside this hill, then we're going to make sure that the animals that belong in there, that started in there, still have a way to function. Now, granted, you don't want worms crawling across your kitchen table. But that doesn't mean you don't want worms getting into your plants. Matter of fact, quite honestly, they prefer them there. And I'm referring to the indoor plants. Okay, it's really not that hard to piece it together. At least not from my perspective. But what you got to remember is these guys have literally built a world where it is what mankind would, as near as I can figure, call Eden. Okay, because you don't have the conflict of people fighting each other or predators taking out herbivores. You just don't have it. All of them die. But some animals are adapted to taking care of the carcasses. Some animals are adapted to taking care of the fluids. The list goes on. The Mobians homeworld, Mobius, is a wonderful little place. And honestly, I don't know if there's another planet that is actually that peaceful. Even when you look at the Venusians, okay, they are not always getting along. Okay, it really boils down to on Mobius, there is literally no conflict. Okay, yes, they've got a government, but the reality is when we talk about a one world government on Mobius, we are talking about a planet where every member of society is a member of that government. Okay, where everybody, now it doesn't have to, it's not like here where people vote and say, we gotta, I want this done and we want these benefits and those benefits. On Mobius, it's a question of somebody will come up and say, hey, we've got a problem. We've got this, and we've got a mountainside that just came down and we need help. So a group will be mobilized to go and help. But because of the level of their help, they don't rely on technology to do much, aside from travel planet to planet. Okay, I mean, well, I shouldn't say that, because they do have physical mining equipment. That's because the minerals have to be pulled out in order to make what they're aiming for. Because they did go backwards a little. They released some of their manifestation capability on the whole, but some of the Mobians are still very capable of decisive molecular modification. By the way, you'll also find, especially with their starships, they do not have weapons on their starships. Weapons are too unreliable. So what they do is they take Mobian metaphysicians who can look at a ship and separate it. And let's face it, technology just has no way of defending itself. Fortunately, the Mobians are not aggressive. Okay, they are a very peaceful community. And what you're looking at with them is they're constantly looking at how to make the life better, more relaxing, more enjoyable, if you will. Okay, and they started saying like millennia back just by doing basic physical art. That's where they have got a lot of their people. Like one of the most revered, if you will, professions. And really, it's what people do. It's not, they don't get paid for it. Okay. Because there is none of the greed and what have you, food is shared freely. Okay. If somebody can't go get their own, somebody else will bring it. Usually unrequested, aside from, check with your neighbor, see if they're okay. If they're not able to get out and get their own food, then it's brought to them or it's manifested for them. As you can see, it's an interesting setup. Okay, but this is a home world that if you're looking to retire, personally, I recommend finding a place on the world you evolved on. Okay, but there are some people that do end up emigrating to Mobius. Okay, but they have to do things, and there are very specific places they're given. They're told, okay, because you are a non-Mobian, you're not going to deal with things the same way we are. So they've made a community where people can intermix with each other. Mobians can come and go, but they do have not segregated but specialized living arrangements for non-Mobians. Okay, and you're still taught. I mean, one of the biggest things that the non-Mobians are taught is there is no hunting permitted. You don't do it. If you do it, they will terminate you. Whether you're a visitor or not will not be part of the equation. Because the thing that happens is the moment somebody does that, if they are permitted to survive, that cancer, if you will grow. So the Mobians just cut it short right off the bat. But they don't make a big deal of it. The offending party, aka the hunter, or the forester that cuts down a tree without conversing with people and finding out which ones are good, which ones are safe to bring down. Okay, these people are considered violent and are terminated. Now I know that sounds, well, isn't it violent to terminate an aggressor? In a way, yes. But what it boils down to is this. You either take out the aggressor or let the aggressor build other aggressors around it, at which point you've got a very big problem. Now, this method has worked for literally 50,000 years. Okay? And it's not going to be changing just because humans aren't happy with it. I mean, you got to remember, Mobians started off as humans, so they understand all too well what drives people. The other nice part about the Mobian homeworld is they are not overloaded. What they're doing is they've got their planet, okay, but because they are using a multi-tier level, they've got a lot more area to work with. Okay, if you think about it, Earth has the Earth's surface, and that's pretty much what you're dealing with. Okay, some humans have built their little communities on stilts into the edge of the water. Okay, but the Mobians have floating cities out on the ocean. And yes, you are right. You get out on the ocean, and the weather can get a little trippy. But because of the way the planet is built and the way it's situated, it doesn't have the real extreme weather patterns, which means you don't get these mile high, or these 500 foot high tidal waves. Okay, you've got a city that literally is floating just, back and forth, up and down with the tide. Okay, and yes, they do have safety precautions to make sure a city does not run aground. Okay, but they're built that way with a lot of safety measures in place. They also take into consideration that while they're building a city, animals have to get used to the changes as well. So this is taken into consideration. Now the plants will grow throughout the city, and when you see on Earth, some cities have vines or moss growing on the walls of a building. Same thing happens there. But here's the neat thing: when a building starts to break down, what ends up happening is the plants around are told it's now evacuated. Okay, and they will disassemble the building themselves. Now, Lemurian Empire, everything was done by manifestation. The Mobian Empire, they lay it out by manifestation, as in, let's take a look at this building that I want to put here. I'm going to make it out of manifest. I'm going to physically manifest it. Now I'm going to take physical materials and cover up what I built. And as they cover it up, the manifested parts are released. Net result, when somebody passes away, the building doesn't vanish, which is what wiped out the Lemurian Empire in the first place. So we are looking at a world that is designed for recycling. Okay, it was designed for recycling by the Mobians when they first colonized. They decided they did not want to change the world. They wanted to live amongst it. Okay, and this is something that most humans just don't get. Okay, I've seen some examples of humans that do this, but very, very few. Now, where am I here? We're just hitting the 10-minute mark. So, couple of things to look at. Tomorrow, tomorrow we are going to be looking at the importance of gifting. Okay. Now, many of you celebrate Christmas, many of you don't. But whether you do or not, almost everybody around the world, almost every culture, does celebrate birthdays. Birthdays, graduations, whatever. Okay, coming of age. Tomorrow we're going to discuss the importance of gifting. Why it is such an important thing, what benefit it has, and how to go about making that work. Okay. Now, on Monday, we are going to be looking at decommercializing Christmas. 2026, I'm going to be spending a lot of my time, and we'll go into that on Tuesday, or on Monday rather. What can you do so that the name of the game for Christmas of 2026 is not how much money do you have to spend? Now, granted, there are things you cannot do. Okay, if you're into Lego, it's a great pastime. I'm betting you as an individual probably can't make Lego blocks. Okay, or computers. So there are things that are going to be necessary, that you'll have to end up purchasing. But we're going to look at how to decommercialize. What can you do to cut the cost and improve the energy around decommercialized Christmas? And you'll notice I said decommercialized, not decommissioned. Then on Tuesday, we are going to look at the backbone of the way my life went: believe in yourself and follow your dreams. Or more accurately, believe in yourself and attain your dreams. We're going to show you how all of this fits together so that going into 2026, you can truly start with a new life. Okay, you'll be building on the remnants of your old one, but we're going to show you how to take control of your life and absolutely land on your feet with it, regardless of what state you're in. On Mobius, I've had a lot of discussions with them. They had a really neat idea. They got bored on Earth here and started to learn basic art. Okay, and I mean basic as in let's stack stones and call it something. And then they figured out how to smooth it out. Well, I'll tell you, it's a long process, but it is something that is well worth it. Okay, and we're going to look at the whole, when we take a look at this whole thing about this planet, we cannot afford to continue waiting for governments, the industry moguls, the religious factor. We cannot effectively wait for them to straighten it out. Okay, we got to get started on it. So, 2026, that's what I'm going to push for. Okay, and I do hope that many of you will follow suit, at least to a degree. Well, that was different. I have no idea what that was. Saw something pop up there on my screen, and I have no idea where from. But there we are. Now,
Keith, let me address that.
okay.
There is an individual who went into chat whose username ends in 7677. I'm not going to say his name because it is obscene and it is against our terms of service. You have been banned. That's all there is to it.
Well, that's what that. Okay. I appreciate that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Storm. That is why he sits in the background, is to make sure we don't have those problems. So thanks very much for that, Storm. Yeah, I was tempted to say something else about that, or about you, but that's another thing altogether. I'll leave that to you. But I do want, because we're under the 5-minute mark here, so I do want to say thank you so very much, people, for sharing your time with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you again tomorrow. And until then, do take care of yourselves and each other. And for pity's sakes, stay positive.